Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As Jonathan mentioned, my name is Megan Keene. I am Director of Product Marketing at Adobe for Pro Video, but I'm also actually have history as a filmmaker. I went to film school, so I know what a lot of you are going through right now. And I want to just give a warm welcome to Paul and Zoe and Aashish. Thank you so much for being here with us today, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Um, yeah, I think a great place to start is just to give everybody a little bit of understanding of where you all kind of got your start in film and filmmaking. So Ashish, can we start with you? Like, how did you get your start?
Yeah, so I'm originally from India, and I was always interested in computers and music and movies and stuff, and editing seemed to kind of be a great combination of all those things. So yeah, I worked for a couple of years there, and then I attended the American Film Institute in Los Angeles. And after graduating, I've been working as an assistant editor and an editor in film and TV.
And you're based in LA?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, great. And what about you, Zoe?
I studied documentary filmmaking in college under a really good professor. Wanted to become a documentary filmmaker, but I realized it's way too hard for me. But it did help me to discover my love for editing. So after graduation, I also applied AFI for editing. And yeah, so since then, I've been working as editor and assistant editor in the industry.
And Paul, finally, how did you get your start?
Yeah, thanks everybody for showing up. I'm just watching the chat of everybody listing their universities where they went to school. I see some people went to University of New Mexico, and I know Deborah Fort, who's my old professor, is there. So if you see her, say hi. I I grew up in Alabama, and my mother's a photographer, my dad's a lawyer. So I kind of was like back and forth between, and they split up when I was young, so it was like this really art centric household, and then very kind of like more business oriented, but still storytelling household of a lawyer, right? Because they have to craft narratives. And so when I was in high school, I met this guy named Peter Hastings, and he had this kind of funny thing he would do where instead of like writing a report, he would make a video. He'd make a film, and it would have nothing to do with whatever the assignment was. And so I thought that's a really cool way to not do schoolwork. So I started making films with him, and it would be like a social studies project about some war in the 1800s, and we would make like a mafia movie and a kung fu movie where we, are running around my dad's office building at night. And so I realized that was, the most fun and the most engaged and the easiest thing to focus on that I had found in a long time. I, was diagnosed with ADD when I was younger, and at that point had gone off my meds because I was like too cool, which was probably a mistake. And so filmmaking was like the one thing that held my attention. And so I looked around at schools. I found a school called College of Santa Fe, which is gone now, and school there. And while I was there, I realized that I did not enjoy being on set. I enjoyed writing and I enjoyed editing, but the actual shooting was just so tedious and painful for me. And it took me like 3 years to realize that I could just skip that part. I could edit for other people. For some reason, I just didn't put it together that like that was a worthwhile and fun thing to do. And so I started working on other people's projects. And eventually, about the time, the month that I was graduating, I realized like, this is what I want to do. I want to be an editor. I went to Brazil for a little while and then came back to Alabama and just got really lucky and got a job as a documentary editor for public television. Did that for 7 years, and then I saw a film called Until the Quiet Comes, a short film by Khalil Joseph. It just like changed something in me, and I went home that night and I told my wife, I think I have to quit my job. I think we have to move to LA and find these people. And so that's what we did. It was like a year-long process of I came out, I worked odd jobs, I met as many people as I could. I met his editor, Luke Lynch, and then I made the official move about 6 months later. My wife moved 6 months after that, and I just started intern. I was like 30, 29-year-old unpaid intern, and I was working for like Tim and Eric and Absolutely Productions. I was working on the Eric Andre show, and just like doing whatever I could. I was like, I remember I was like, I would get in early and vacuum or like sweep the kitchen up or organize the cereal boxes just because I didn't have anything, no one trusted me on a computer at that point. And eventually that, one thing led to another, and I started assistant editing or interned for the Eric Andre show, assistant edited, and then went to business with Luke Lynch, who was Below Joseph's editor. And we have a company called Parallax, and that's where we're at. And I met the Daniels in that first month I was in LA. I had a rule of not saying no to any invitation. And somebody invited me to someone else's birthday party at a roller rink, and it turned out to be Daniel Scheiner's birthday party. So I showed up, roller skated, did karaoke, and then later on I found out they were filmmakers and started working together.
Awesome. Aashish, Paul spoke a little bit about going from like, I want to be a filmmaker to I really want to pursue editing. When did you make that decision that editing was really the part of filmmaking that you wanted to dig in on?
I tried working on set and I really did not enjoy it. Then I saw the movie The Social Network, and I think that really changed it for me. Like something about it just felt so perfect, and I couldn't put my finger on it initially, but when I started to analyze things, I kind of realized like, oh wow, that like editing can make that much of a difference. So yeah, for me that was kind of, yeah, that was a moment. And also I just like being in a room by myself. So yeah,
And what
that
about
helped.
for you? What about for you, Zoe? What made you decide that editing was where you wanted to focus?
When I was studying documentary, I would help my professor go through all the archive footages and comb through the production footages. I really enjoyed that process. I found myself very, focused on looking at all the stuff and then go through them and put them together. I think it was definitely during the college time I found out like, yeah, this thing, I could sit in the room all by myself for 10 hours just to try to figure out how to put these things together to tell a really good story. And, that's pretty much where I founded my passion.
Nice. And then we have a question in the Q&A from Nicolas that is directed toward Paul, but I'd love to know it for all of you. How long have you been using Premiere Pro as for editorial?
I mean, for me, it was like the week that Final Cut X was released. So whenever that was. I was Final Cut.
2011, June 2011. I remember it very well.
Well, you know what? I think I stayed on 7 for a while. So because I moved here in 2013, and I remember it was like very shortly after I moved. So I probably must have stuck with it for 2 years. Geez, hoping they would like realize. But yeah, we jumped to Premiere. I remember Luke and I sitting in a room. We were like, let's just give it a week. I think it took us like a day or two to really start feeling comfortable. And then, I learned on Avid at school, or I learned on a Steam Deck. That was I had, at College Santa Fe, they made us cut our first student films on film. Then we moved to Avid, then Final Cut, and then Premiere, and I haven't really looked back since. I can jump back and forth between Avid and Premiere pretty easily, but Parallax is a Premiere only house. Zoe,
And what about?
I think for me is sorry. I think for me is also around college time. I do believe I used Final Cut Pro 7 when I was first and second year in college. But I think since I graduated, I believe that would be 2015. Around that time, I started using Premiere. But when we were at AFI, we were studying Avid. But if you ask me since how long since I knew it, probably yeah, since college time.
What about you, Aashish?
I remember using Windows Movie Maker like so many years ago, and then I sort of graduated to Sony Vegas, and then I taught myself how to use Premiere because it was kind of similar. And I also just couldn't afford Final Cut. So yeah, that was, I think,
Great.
around 12 years ago or something. Yeah.
Okay. So let's jump in and start talking about Everything Everywhere All at Once. How did the three of you all sort of become part of the project? I know, Paul, obviously you have a a longer history with the Daniels. What was that first, meeting like, or how did you get pulled in to cut on this one?
They had they'd been talking about the film for a while. They'd done Swiss Army Man, and they had used another editor named Matt Hannum, who's now a close friend. And I got to kind of like be a part of that in a very small way of watching, giving notes, and just responding, and just being like a big cheerleader for it. And so they had been talking about everything everywhere, and I never had I try never, even with my closest collaborators, to never assume I'm going to work on anything, because I want them to feel free to do what's best for the project without feeling any kind of pressure, like, hey, I want to work on this, please, like put a word in. It's just not a good place to be for someone. So I was in the same position. I was just a fan of the project. They had pitched it to me, meaning they were working through the script at one point, and this was back when it was a script for Jackie Chan, and it was about a father and a daughter. And they set me in a room, and they acted it out basically for 2 hours, and kind of just went through the plots, and then asked me a bunch of questions afterwards. And it was incredible. It was like, I cried a bunch, maybe 3 or 4 times, and just left that meeting like, I just can't wait to see it. Like, please, I hope you guys get to make this insane. And then I think I was just remembering this recently. Like, I think we all went to We Spa, which is like a Korean spa in Koreatown, and they were like, we were all just like sitting around the tubs, and they were like, so do you want to edit this movie with us? Yeah, hell yeah. And that was kind of it. After that, they sent me the script, which had changed by that point, and had become about a mother-daughter. And I read the script, got very intimidated and freaked out, and then put the script away and said, I'm just not going to worry about that until the footage starts coming in. And that was it.
Yeah. So, and we will get to Aashish and Zoe, how you became part of the project, but I know that came a little bit later. So, Paul, you were a part of the project even before production started. And what was the relationship between you and the production as it was going?
Yeah.
Were they feeding footage to you? Did you visit set? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, they shot in Simi Valley, which is like a 45-minute drive from LA, if I remember correctly. And it's almost all shot in this one old like Bank of America building. Even like the apartment, the laundromat upstairs. If you go to that laundromat, it's one story, and they just like comped it upstairs, and they built an apartment into the bank. So I would go, and partly out of curiosity, partly out of like, it just seems fun, and a little bit just to kind of read the vibe of how things were going and what they were nervous about, so that if they were nervous that they had not quite got this scene, I could run back to my office, pump it together real quick, just an assembly, send it to them. They could say, okay, yeah, we do need a close up here. We need a reverse shot here, whatever. Didn't happen often. They, for the most part, covered everything great. But I think that during production, my role for the most part was to just help them stay confident that they were getting what they needed. And, every once in a while, like the first thing I cut was the fanny pack fight scene. And so I sent that over after they shot it. And it just was like an energy boost, right? So during lunch, a couple of days later, they showed the whole crew, and the energy was just, so great. Because for the most part, when you're working on this stuff, you don't know, you have a trust in the people that you're working with. You don't know if you're actually getting what you think you're getting. So that was a fun thing to do, is occasionally just send them like, hey, here's a really cool, you guys are doing great. Like, check this out,
Now, you and I first met around the time that you cut The Death of Dick Long, and you guys were at Sundance. And I remember we were just about to put Premiere Pro productions into beta. And you started telling me about how you guys kind of, the extent to which you collaborate at Parallax. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But my thought was like, oh man, like these are the people that we need to start testing this collaborative paradigm for Premiere Pro. And so you guys were one of the first projects to ever use productions in Premiere Pro.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about why you made the decision to go with productions for this project? I know you already mentioned that Premiere Pro is what you guys use at Parallax. The Daniels are obviously very big fans of After Effects and Premiere, and so I know that was kind of,
Yeah.
you knew that that was what was going to happen, but productions in particular, why was that decision made?
Yeah, I think it helps to take a step back towards the approach that we have kind of developed at Parallax, of the way that we collaborate and the way that we edit. And this goes actually back to the Eric Andre show. So Luke Lynch, my partner in Parallax, he cut the pilot of Eric Andre show all the way through, not the last season, but the season 4, whatever that was. And on the Eric Andre show, while they were cutting, the show is structured basically. There's a man on the street, and then there's an interview, and then there's a man on the street bit, which is him going out doing pranks, and then there's interview, and so it's kind of segmented, and they have 3 or 4 editors, and each editor would get a bit, right? And I think in the first season, I came on in season 2, and the first season it was kind of like, everybody takes your bit, you run it through to the end, and then you put it all together. And they learned pretty quickly that it's a lot more interesting and a lot more fun to just start mixing all that up and saying, hey, I'm stuck on this, you take this, I'll take yours, then I'll give it to him, and then we'll get it back, and we'll steal some of those ideas, but not all of them. And it became this very like egoless way of working where no one has ownership over any particular part, any particular segment. It's all kind of edited in collaboration with each other. And that's hard for some people. I know there's a lot of editors who come in and try it and are like, I don't like this. You took my thing and you changed it and you made it. I don't like what you did. And that's fine. It's not for everybody, but through the years, we've adopted that as basically the way that we operate in Parallax for everything as much as we can. Even if it's not officially, like we can't officially bring on the 4 editors, like I'm constantly throwing stuff to my coworkers. I'm throwing stuff to Luke and saying, hey, can you just do a pass on this? I think it's really good, but I also realize I've been working on it for 3 months and I don't know anymore. So what we used to do in Premiere was just like send project files and it was messy, you use media browser and you import it and you relink everything. We just didn't, there was no other way to do it. Avid had their kind of their version of that, but that wasn't the way that we worked, so we couldn't tap into that. And we were working on everything everywhere. We were getting started, and I think we just reached out to Adobe like, hey, this movie's going to be crazy, just based on what we're planning. It would be great if we had someone just as support, just to help us out in case we're in any problems. And they said, hey, we're doing this secret thing, testing this feature called Productions. It was exactly what we needed. It's just like a way to collaborate where I can jump into. So Daniel and Dan edit with me. They're constantly just like throwing ideas on or tweaking things that I've done. So they could be editing, and I could jump into their project, see what they're doing, steal it while they're working, put it back in mine. They could do the same. I could say, hey, I'm jumping out. Can you jump in and just like play with this montage? Like I feel like this moment's not quite right. They could do that, or vice versa. Or I could throw something to Zoe and be like, hey, can you sound design this? I'm stuck on it. Like, can you list up all the alternate takes of this one line, so that I can just like, you can stack them on top of each other, or all the reaction shots of Evelyn when she's crying. You can stack them on top and I can just cycle through them. And so that's the way that we work in general, is just like intensive collaboration, no real ownership of stuff. For the most part, when we credit ourselves, we just say edited by Parallax. Really know who did it. So that's where that came from, and that's why Productions ended up being, it's the only way we work now. We don't work in just work in Productions. Even if I'm just doing something on my own, it's a Productions.
Got it. And then Zoe and Aashish, I know, specifically as assistant editors, so much of what you're needing to do is really figure out the workflow. How are you all going to work together? How are you going to keep everything organized? How are you going to make sure that like everybody understands what is like the primary sequence? And so, first of all, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you came into the project initially, and then sort of what was your approach? Was this the first time that you two had worked in Productions in Premiere Pro? I assume yes, since this was one of the first productions to ever use it. So
So I got an email from AFI from the editing discipline, saying there's a show looking for an bilingual AE. So I just sent in my resume. I think I replied the email immediately, and I believe I was the first one to when I believe I was the first one who did the interview. I met Paul and Daniels at Parallax. So long story short, I got the job through interview, but I guess I impressed everyone. That's why they hired me. Um, and then Ashish and I were classmates, and so I mean I shouldn't answer the question for Ashish, but we were classmates and we worked together a lot through school when we were at school and post school. So when our show needed another AE to help out, I just recommended Ashish, and that's how he joined the project.
And then I'd love to hear your take from like the perspective of an assistant editor, the advantages of using productions and how you
Oh
guys
yes,
kind of
yes.
went about setting that all up.
Oh yes, yes. So I remember Paul told me, Zoe, you gotta go to Adobe in Santa Monica. We're using this new feature, and I'm gonna need you to learn it. I was like, okay, cool. Um, so I knew Avid. I was really what trained with Avid when I was at school. So when I went to Adobe, they explained it to me about this production. I was like, oh my God, I know this because this is the same logic as Avid, but it's a little bit different. But the idea behind it was really similar. So I was really, really excited about it because I was like, oh, this is going to solve a lot of issues that single Premiere project would have, which is, for example, the projects tend to get really, 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 really big, and opening a project's going to take forever and stuff like that. So with this new function, with this new feature, we will be able to break down stuff into like smaller portions, smaller projects. And with working with Ashish, there's two AEs on it. It's even better because, he can has his set and I can have my set, but we're pointing towards the same media. So it just makes everything much more easy to be organized and easier to collaborate.
Yeah, so building on that, Ashish, and I think Zoe, were you planning to sort of share some of how you guys had things set up? I
Yes.
think it would be kind
So
of fun to show people.
yeah.
But
So
like, what are some of like when you're working? I mean, I will say, as a former editor, even just watching the film, my mind was reeling in terms of how did they do this? How did they organize this? Like how I can't even imagine. So what were some of the like foundational things that you guys thought through in terms of how you made sure that editorial stayed successful, stayed organized? Um, especially passing between editors, all the different sort of universes and timelines. Like, how? I guess that's my question: is how?
um, Ashish, you wanna?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, the footage, I mean, the organization was all started by Zoe, but we built upon it and stuff. But everything I think we had stuff sorted into like scenes, and there were string outs for universes as well. So there were multiple ways to organize the same kind of footage. And the good thing about productions is that you don't have to be working in the same exact project file as everyone else. You could have your own set of project files in your production, and you could just be passing projects back and forth, and no media gets duplicated, unlike before. Um, so yeah, we had like groups of scenes, we had individual scenes, there were universes that had, there was overlaps of footage, because of the nature of the film. Zoe, sorry,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah.
I don't know if everyone can see the screenshot that I'm sharing. So on the left hand side, this is within a scene. As you can see, like we didn't name the footage the traditional way, which is just very simply scene by take. We gave it a name specifically, like we give it a description, I would say. We give it a very short description of what's happening in the shot. And and we have a lot of multicam, so I would have spit out like whether it's a close up or it's medium shot, whatever, just to, the name of each clip is super long, but if you read the name of the clip, you can very easily know what exactly is happening
It's
in this.
it's important to say too that we didn't rename the actual files. We're just renaming
Yes,
Premiere.
yes,
Hmm.
yes, yes. And then I believe on the right hand side, so this is how I would organize the footage, the string outs, how I would organize the string out for Paul. So I have the traditional way on the top, which is just individual scene, and I also have the second one, which is the fight. So I would break down these fights, the footage, I'll break them down. And then the third one is by universe, so like each universe would have its own strain out. So let's say Paul is looking for a specific clip that he only he remembers, like, oh, I remember it was in the, let's say, the opera universe. He could either go inside the opera universe to find it. Let's say if he wanted to look at all the footage of the dogfight, he could just go to, the dogfight sequence and find all the footage of related to that fight.
So I work in string outs, which means I don't go for the most part into individual clips in the footage unless I'm really, really diving for something. But I prefer a string out, which means all the clips laid from beginning to end on a timeline and not cutting out anything before action and anything after cut, because sometimes there's like these little beautiful moments where the actors aren't acting, but there's a shot of them doing something that I might be able to steal and use. So that I get those all laid out on a timeline, and what I can do is I can scrub through to find the clips that I need. The advantage to that, to me, it's similar to when I was first learning to edit on a film reel, which if you want to look for a shot, you have to go through everything else that's been shot. Meaning that as I'm scrubbing through to find the clip I'm looking for, I might stumble upon something and say, oh, I forgot about that moment. There's a moment where Wayman looks really happy. After they called cut, he's laughing. Well, maybe we can steal his face because I need a shot of him laughing in this other scene. Maybe we can cut his face out and put that on a green screen and use it for this other shot or something, And it allows me to constantly being like fed new ideas from the footage, so that as I'm scrubbing, seeing things that because a lot of times when you go looking, when you come up with let me just rephrase that. When I think that I'm fairly good at identifying when there's a problem with a scene, but usually my first instinct about the solution to that problem is wrong. Usually. The problem is right, and identifying that problem is really important. Then I have to go try the first idea that I have, and it's usually wrong, and I just keep going. But so as I'm looking for the solution, as I'm saying, okay, well, my solution is to put this clip in and fix it this way, I'll be scanning through all the other stuff shot for that scene, and I'll get 4 more ideas just from the scrub. So that's why I like string outs versus if I was just in the bin on the left and just going to each clip, I would just click on the clip I needed. I would put it in, it wouldn't work, and then I'd have to start over and just sit and think about something versus a string out where I could just get all this stuff laid out in front of me. So that's why it's organized this way too. And this movie was too big, but for the most part, I like to do, if it's a smaller project like a music video, I like to do an all footage string out where it's just every clip that's been shot for the entire project on one timeline, usually like 20 hours of footage or something, so that I can get even better scrub. As I'm scrubbing for something at the end, I'm looking at the stuff from the beginning and thinking about ways I can repurpose that.